think I'm taking Peggy on the road to introduce me. What a wonderful, wonderful introduction. I'm so happy to be here today to share, a big idea. And just as, you can imagine, and I'll speak a little bit to this big idea called US Bank Stadium, or this big idea called Target Field, or this big idea, that we all kind of rally ourselves around one form or another. This is one of those big ideas that perhaps I didn't anticipate I would be participating in and leading, but I'm certainly pleased to be doing that. A couple of things that I'd like to at least note is that when we think about a land bridge, it's a structure. But what I'd really like to convey and have you consider is how might we think about leveraging the policies of transportation, the investment of transportation for community building, not simply a structure for parks and gathering, but one that might consider much, much greater response to the dynamics and the issues that our communities face. Let me just make sure my slides are advancing. I do think what's important is to kind of set the foundation. Keith didn't just wake up one day and say, oh, let's build a land bridge. It was something that has been bubbling up for quite some time. And I think it's important also to set the foundation that for 150 years, African Americans have migrated to the city of St. Paul, to the state of Minnesota. And with that 150 years, had established the social, cultural, economic, civic, spiritual fabric of the community, and then the freeway. I really want you to digest that. And then the freeway undermined and dismantled the social, cultural, economic, civic, spiritual fabric of the community. When you really put it that way, then we ask ourselves, well, why is it that the African American community can't quite elevate itself and put itself in a place of progress to the scale? Why is it that Minnesota ranks negative by most racial disparity indicators? Because, in my view, the social, cultural, economic, civic fabric of the community was devastated. Think about it. Whether you're Scandinavian, whether you're German, most communities gather, and from that gathering have commonalities that build the social, cultural, economic, civic fabric of the community. So African Americans were no different in the migration period. But again, 150 years. Then the freeway comes through. Devastates the community right through the heart. Rondo Days. We were talking about Rondo Days a little bit earlier. Rondo Days was a celebration that was ignited in '83. And it was intended as just simply a reunion. And then it happened again for the next 35 years until COVID. So for 35 years, people have been I don't even know how to even say that. Been celebrating a reunion. Reuniting.
It was in a cross with.
Okay, thanks, Peggy. But and it was in my mind a pivot point of celebration, a pivot point of healing, right, from past devastation. And then it kept going on year in and year out. The idea of the cap, has anyone been on the Central Light Rail on University Avenue? Central Light Rail corridor on University Avenue came through, right? But there were no stops planned in Rondo. I know, I'm surprised too. There were no stops. So the community rose up and says, that's just not an acceptable thing to have this light rail go through with no stops in Rondo. It feels like a similar dismissal. Decisions made that have impact on a community that had been there for 150 years. Fast forward, they said, well, not only do we want stops, but we want you to replace the land that was taken back in the 50s. You see now where the mindset of the community is. There was a formal apology that was established. The formal apology for them from then Commissioner Charlie Zelle, Mayor Coleman. So again, it's another pivot opportunity for healing. From there, and I'm just going to fast forward to, I was hired formally in 2019. I left the Department of Transportation in 2015 and began to lead the effort that we're currently embarking on. So it was an intentional decision, as you can see. There was a northern route and there was a southern route. The outlined blue that you see there was the Rondo neighborhood. It was the only place African Americans could live because of redlining. So the very place in which African Americans were told they could only live was the very place the decision was made to take the freeway through. So it was a political and intentional decision. And at the same time, this thing called urban renewal was happening. Redevelopment was happening. You know, the automobile was really emerging. Eisenhower had decided to put all of these federal dollars in order to compete with Germany and its mobility, but also there was a lot of growth in suburban areas. So what benefited, or what was said to benefit one group or a certain proposition, undermined another. So I hope you can appreciate the historical context, because it sets the foundation for the why. Why is it that we're doing what we're doing today? 700 homes, 300 businesses. Now just think about 700 homes, 300 businesses taken, the fabric, intergenerational wealth loss of $35 million. That's $50,000 per home in its value if it were still there in 1980. And the reason why that date is so important, this is when the gain of equity of $50,000, but it's also when college was affordable. And African Americans were entering college at unprecedented rates. So that money was not available to utilize. Like we all know, equity is used for starting a business or even helping to pursue education. That $35 million could have paid for 4,800 college degrees, 4-year college degrees at the University of Minnesota in 1980. Now imagine the contribution economically and civically for a community if it is able to elevate the young people and give young people the access to the opportunities. So you see kind of where we're going. If the homes had not been taken out, the current value today would be $350 million. You can see we're building a case here. By each of these measures, Rondo ranks net negative. Just to give you just a couple of things. Education security, proximity to pollution, health, financial security. When I say rank net negative, what is equity? Net positive, right? So it's not neutral. It really is struggling. And I attribute that to the undermining of the social, cultural, economic, civic, spiritual fabric of the community. It's called root shock, a shock to the system, the very fabric. Most communities would have responded very similarly if the very orientation they have of their community, the functioning of the community, were intact. And what we're dealing with today is the residual implications of what's taken place. So how do you take the past? How do you think about the present? How do you consider the future? And this is what we're challenged to kind of put together, is a proposition, a big idea. Well, what is that big idea? To reconnect the community of Rondo, to revitalize the community of Rondo, to restore the community of Rondo, leveraging a transportation element, policies and investment, the same tools that undermined it. And that's the way I look at it, because I'm kind of a systems thinker. Systems, processes, tools, resources, compound interest works the same for everybody. And when I think about this, this, so do basic principles of how a system functions. But most of this is invisible to communities. I just happen to spend 18 years with the Department of Transportation, so I know it very well, because I managed many of the development resources for projects to emerge. So, leading a restorative effort to reignite an African American cultural enterprise district. Now, that's kind of a fancy way of talking about trying to refabric the community of Rondo that was there before. An African American cultural enterprise district. We didn't call it an African American enterprise district, we just called it a community with businesses and civic organizations, et cetera, et cetera. So if we're aiming at building this enterprise district, we've got to really know it's complex, right? Now, so just imagine residents, the nonprofit ecosystem, each of the jurisdictions, city, county, Met Council, Department of Transportation. Then we get into the state legislature, right? Then we get into the federal. You can see all of these things. So you all are familiar with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, right? That's $3 trillion of resources coming for transportation investment. The state of Minnesota is getting $6 billion. Well, there's an idea, or I've got an idea of what you can do with some of it, you know, to restitch a community that was devastated. So, just imagine, we've done almost every study imaginable. So this essentially, if you can imagine an image over I-94, what really is the cost? With the bipartisan infrastructure bill, you know, the $6 billion that's coming to Minnesota, the structure will cost about $313 million, probably a little bit more than that. That's just the structure. But 80% of that can be paid for using those federal dollars. So really the state investment is pretty small for the potential of possibility. Righting a past wrong, celebrating what's current, but setting conditions for the future. And I don't see this as charity. And it's so important, because oftentimes when you think about communities of color, it's a charitable opportunity. No, this is an opportunity to invest, and I mentioned US Bank Stadium earlier. I had mentioned Target Field earlier. $63 million of state investment. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second as well. But what's the benefit? What's the gain? 576 housing units. 1,800 jobs. Revenue back to the city. Business market space. 13 acres of potential outdoor amphitheater programming space, right? There's an added value here. By that $63 million, which is really what we're talking about in terms of the state contribution, what you're able to do is create $170 million worth of new land. I don't know about you all. Anybody know anybody who's creating land? Well, we have an added value, but we see it beyond just the Rondo neighborhood. This is really about the state of Minnesota, because by every measure, Rondo or the state is ranked next to Mississippi in racial disparities. And I know it's just so hard for us to get our heads around that. I'm a Minnesotan. I grew up in Duluth. By the way, the YMCA, I was at Blaisdell for many years. But you can imagine, you know, we have a tremendous opportunity to try to reverse the very things that we're dealing with today. And there are a lot of folks in the ecosystem working hard, whether it's on housing and other things, but I just really want to emphasize this. Anyone heard of public-private partnerships? Right? Yeah, it's a tested, known model, right? Have we ever tried to apply this in a neighborhood? No. Well, I say, well, if compound interest works the same, if the systems, processes, tools, and resources work the same for private sector, then why can't we just tweak this a little bit and apply it in a way where the community is the developer? You want to digest that a little bit? What is he talking about? I think about the old show. What you talking about, Willis? It's about taking these things that are already tried, tested, true, and trying to figure out how to apply them a little bit differently. And that's the exciting thing about this, because we had to ask ourselves this question: who's the primary, secondary, tertiary beneficiary? It's got to be the community, right? But when development happens, and I'm not anti-development, but when development happens, communities are usually secondary or tertiary beneficiaries at best. Yet, private developers are using public tools and resources. $350 million for US Bank Stadium, $280 million for Target Field. What was the number I said I thought I needed from the state? I mean, to me, it makes some kind of sense, right? And no one can tell me how that investment directly benefited Rondo. Passive beneficiaries, but not direct beneficiaries. And I think by shifting the way that we're approaching this in the model, I think we might have something here. So what is ReConnect Rondo actually doing? We're setting conditions. Okay, setting conditions for what? We don't do housing. We don't do education. We don't do programming. But we do understand transportation infrastructure. My background in the nonprofit arena for a long time, in the youth arena for a long time. My involvement with US Bank Stadium and professional technical engineering and architecture, my work with public sector, with DOT, and my understanding of private development financing. So we're setting the conditions to preserve Rondo, to increase better health outcomes for Rondo, but I would argue the state of Minnesota, and I would argue the region, okay, because it's a model that's very unique. Because it's geographically Rondo doesn't mean that we don't tie it to North Minneapolis, or to my hometown of Duluth, or to Rochester. We say what's good for Rondo is good for the Iron Range. What's good for the Iron Range is good for Rondo, all right? At least that's what we believe, and that's why we kind of move forward. So these are the organizations in the ecosystem that already are in the ecosystem that do what they do. Rondo Community Land Trust, Aurora St. Anthony, Walker West Music Academy, right? The ecosystem exists. The question is, how do you amplify the ecosystem, leveraging a transportation element, right? And help to resource the programming that it can be more effectively responsive to what the needs are in the community. And that's really principally what we're doing, is trying to do our best to take a look at the geographic area. Who's doing what? Try to get a way in which they may work more collectively, more collaboratively forward in this geographic space. So each of these dots represents an agency, a church, an organization led by African Americans. And then we go to the second tier of who are supporters and partners in the work. So you kind of see where we're going here, right? This is a transportation element. But what are we doing? We're building community. And I think the default is, well, why do we need a land bridge? Well, it's the catalytic tool. Can we imagine 576 new housing units, a business marketplace, etc.? So you can see we've made a technical case, a business case, a moral case, and a just case. Trying to speak to everybody's language, right? The Department of Transportation can't say, we don't know what we're talking about. The city can't say we're not founded in some real possibility. But I really want to emphasize this. You all familiar with the Urban Land Institute? Okay. Essentially, 45,000 members globally. Well, like Rotary. It's a membership organization of developers, finance people, some pretty smart people. And they've helped us through this process, right? They've validated the possibility and the opportunity. So it's kind of hard to take folks that are in industry, who we rely on in their expertise, and have it applied here for someone to say, oh, that's not going to work here, when we're talking about the same systems, processes, tools, and resources, right? So I'm going to go through this just a little bit swifter, just to give you a sense of where we are, because I know Brian was around in the early portion of this, right? But we're already doing the city's work, which is creating what is historically called the master plan, but it's the neighborhood plan, a restorative neighborhood plan. And I'll tell you, on average, between 80 and 150 people participate with us. There's high interest in this project. High interest. But there are also folks that say, I don't know why we need a land bridge. I don't know why we would do this. So we've got more folks to reach out to, more folks to talk with. But I will say that the things that we're doing are being validated even within the community. Can you imagine a blank canvas? Nothing there. How do we build something or create something that actually can have scalable change in a geographic space? A lot of us, we think about successes, and sometimes those successes, while very important successes, they're incremental projects, small scale. I don't think we think big enough in our responses to community, right? I don't think we do, because we can't even see how that project is going to influence this entire area. It's going to bring some benefit, but here we got to stretch a roadway, right? And how do we stretch that roadway to become catalytic? A larger scale geographic benefit. So if you can imagine this geographic area that you see up on top, the study area, Hamlin to Rice Street, University to Selby. That's a lot of space to try to influence with this small little kind of sliver of a new land bridge. But you can see the context of the way we're thinking about it. How do we look at transportation, park space, economic development, housing, look at climate change matters and responding to that, culture, history? Because right now we've got the historic footprint of Rondo, but we've also got the Hmong community that is currently celebrated there, right? We also have East African communities that are certainly there, right? So how do we tie it all together is really the question. Because this is really about the city of St. Paul, but as I've said before, it's about the state of Minnesota. So when we think about all of the efforts, we've got to make sure that, again, we're driven around the data so that we can make a compelling case, a technical case, and I've already spoken to the moral case and the just case. So, also, when the Central Light Rail Corridor came through, there was already concern around displacement and gentrification. People can't afford to live there anymore. There were no guardrails put in place. So today it has a dramatic implication in expediting displacement of people who currently live there. That wonderful diversity that lives in St. Paul in this area is going to be threatened by not having guardrails in for those to ensure that we have a range of people. So we've just completed our anti-displacement study and community investment. We've just are in the tail end, 6 months out from completing our area plan. And this is exciting because, again, this is what the city then will adopt as part of its comprehensive plan, right? Because we've got the partners of the city, county, Met Council, Department of Transportation, and so on. So it's a tremendous opportunity I think we have here, but we as a small nonprofit, we are driving this. It's not the Department of Transportation, it's not the city, it's not the county, it's not Met Council. It's this nonprofit that was founded in 2017. As MnDOT looks at the entire corridor from St. Paul to Minneapolis, we're responsible for this project called the Land Bridge, this African American Cultural Enterprise District. And we're operating in this parallel track and coordinating as we go. It gets a bit complicated sometimes, but it presents such a tremendous opportunity for us overall. I just want to highlight 4 things, and then maybe I'll go into some Q&A in a moment. But the anti-displacement is really the right to remain and stay. In other words, not get taxed out. And when I was talking about the financing mechanism, the 4P, public, private, philanthropic, and people, it allows us to manage the increase of taxes. How many here grew up in Minnesota? All right. How many of you grew up in cold weather? All right, Peggy, you're not from around here, huh? Oh, Berkeley, okay. Well, most of us, well, I'm sure over the years you've kind of learned, you know, sometimes you got this heater in the middle of the room, right? And you want to know how much heat is going to radiate on those cold days. Can you imagine that, right? How close can you be to the heater, or how much radiation can you actually, of heat, produce? Well, that's how we see this land bridge. How much heat can we generate? How much revenue can we generate? And how do we offset increase of taxes? How do we create direct benefits? How do we establish programming? And those kinds of things. So it's about an economic engine, ultimately, that is able to produce enough heat that really is responsive to community overall. So just as I mentioned, the 4P financing model, but also as I've mentioned, or I haven't mentioned it yet, this thing called an authority, the ballpark authority. How much time do I have, Emma? I just want to be mindful.
We have like 6 minutes.
Okay. 6 minutes and we'll do some Q&A. But the ballpark authority, or the sports facilities authority, or the port authority are legislative bodies, right, that can do development. Well, we say, well, we'd love to have a Rondo authority. That's how the community can be the developer. So we've thought through a lot of ways in which community can be the primary beneficiary, secondary, and tertiary beneficiary as well. All right, I'm not going to go into these aspects, but I do want to touch on this. Digital technology. What are the 3 things into the future? I said set conditions for the future. It's going to be technology, agriculture, and energy. Okay. So how do we harness those 3 things? Well, what you see here is a map of the lack of connectivity in Rondo, how the absence of service providers are present. 14 service providers for internet broadband go right by Rondo, but none of them serve Rondo. It follows redlining. So, again, we're thinking about this really comprehensively. So how do we get a focus and generate jobs around technology, jobs around energy, jobs around agriculture in an urban setting, right? To respond to so many other things that are going on within community. So where are we now? 2024, got some work ahead yet, okay? But we're making some really, really good progress. And it's a large proposition. And I don't mind saying we are leading the nation on thinking about this. There are a lot of projects across the country going on. In fact, Buffalo got $1 billion. They don't know what to do with it. We got a plan, and we're waiting for our $1 billion. We don't need $1 billion. But there are folks all over the country in different places on this. And the one thing that I want to really highlight is this right here. ReConnect Rondo is launching the 2nd Reconnecting Community Summit. Last year we had 20 communities across the country come to the Twin Cities to talk about this very subject. How do we leverage transportation and transportation investment? This year we anticipate we're going to double and triple the number of communities. Tampa was here, Portland was here, Houston was here, Kansas City was here, Detroit was here. So St. Paul is becoming the place in which learning about how to leverage transportation investment to benefit community. So with that, I just appreciate the opportunity to chat with you a bit. You can see I can get a little wonky, a little technical, but I just really wanted to set a foundation for folks to understand we have a tremendous opportunity here in Minnesota. We have a tremendous opportunity to right past wrongs, set conditions for the future. And I think that I so appreciate you all listening in. And I'm hoping that you all will join us in being advocates for this opportunity for us. Thank you.